Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what's being called the Great Dismantling of American environmental policy. This isn't just about changing a few rules. It's a deliberate, structural effort to remove the federal government's power to fight climate change, starting with its single most powerful tool, the EPA. So in early 2026, the new administration didn't just tweak things. It kicked off what it proudly called the single largest act of deregulation in all of U.S. history. Right from the start, the message was clear. This was not about small adjustments. It was a fundamental move to completely redefine the government's role in climate oversight. So how do you even start something called a great dismantling? Well, it all begins with one single critical action, formally repealing something called the 2009 Endangerment Finding. You have to remember that name, because this one move is the key that unlocks this entire wave of deregulation. So what exactly is this endangerment finding? Okay, think of it like the legal trigger. After a huge Supreme Court case, the EPA did this massive scientific review. And their official conclusion? That greenhouse gases endanger public health. That finding, right there, became the legal bedrock that gave the federal government the authority to regulate them in the first place. Now, the administration's public reasoning for all this was pretty straightforward. They wanted to remove what they called a crushing economic burden on American industries and, on consumers. The whole strategy was pitched to the public as an act of economic liberation. But to really get the sheer impact of tearing this finding down, we first have to understand how it was built. I mean, this wasn't some rule that just appeared overnight. It was the final product of a years-long legal and scientific battle. And this timeline, it really lays it all out for you. It all starts back in 2007 with the Supreme Court case Massachusetts versus EPA, which basically forced the government to act. That led directly to the 2009 finding, which was then upheld and validated by the courts in 2012. So you see, the 2026 action, it isn't just a policy change. It's a direct attempt to erase this entire legal history. And this really gets to the core of the whole strategy. The goal wasn't just to change a regulation for a few years. It was, in their own words, to break the tool of regulation itself. By getting rid of the endangerment finding, the real aim is to dismantle the entire legal foundation, making it incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, for any future administration to just write new climate rules. So, how on earth did the administration justify such a massive reversal? Well, they built their case on two main pillars: a new and pretty controversial scientific assessment, and a powerful economic story promising huge cost savings for everyone. At the very heart of their scientific case was a report from a brand new climate working group. But this group, it was unusual. For starters, it was put together in secret. In fact, a court later found it actually violated federal transparency laws. But despite that, its report became the linchpin of the administration's entire argument, getting cited more than 20 times in the formal proposal to kill the finding. And right here, you can see the core of the scientific fight. The mainstream scientific community just fired back with a massive 434-page rebuttal. They pointed out what they called glaring errors and totally cherry-picked data. Get this, the CWG claimed Arctic sea ice had declined only 5%. The rebuttals showed they'd used data for the Antarctic by mistake. The actual decline in the Arctic was over 40%. Okay, so the second pillar of their case was purely economic, and it all centered on this just staggering number, $1.3 trillion. The administration's argument was that this was the real cost of environmental regulations, a massive burden passed directly to American families through higher prices on everything from your car to your electricity bill. But independent analyses came out almost immediately, arguing that these numbers were fundamentally flawed. Why? Because they only counted the costs of the regulations while completely ignoring all the benefits. Groups like Resources for the Future actually calculated that these rollbacks would create a net societal loss. Sure, a new car might be a little cheaper up front, but the owner would end up paying thousands more in gas over its lifetime. So with that legal foundation gone, the decision created these immediate and really powerful ripple effects. I mean, this wasn't just some boring bureaucratic change happening in Washington. It had real, tangible consequences, both all across the country and, frankly, around the entire world. On the global stage, the administration announced its plan to withdraw from the UNFCCC. Now, this is the foundational 1992 climate treaty that was signed by literally almost every nation on Earth.
This move would officially leave the United States as the only country in the world not part of the agreement, essentially giving up any global leadership role on clean energy.
Back at home, the battle lines were drawn almost immediately, kicking off a high-stakes legal showdown with California. You see, for decades, California has had this special waiver that lets it set its own, tougher vehicle emission standards, mainly to fight its famous smog. The federal government moved to just revoke that authority completely. And look, this is a huge deal because it's not just about one state. Nearly 20 other states automatically follow whatever California does. So together, they represent this massive regulatory block that covers over 40% of the entire U.S. auto market. This just creates absolute chaos for car makers, who are suddenly caught between two totally conflicting sets of rules. This wave of deregulation was then paired with an aggressive new push to prop up the coal industry. In a move they justified on national security grounds, the administration is expected to mandate that the military has to buy its electricity specifically from aging coal plants. It even took the symbolic step of rebranding the Department of Defense as the Department of War. Okay, so the final piece of this whole strategy, it moves beyond just repealing old rules. It's about engineering a completely new system. A new framework that's designed to make this entire wave of deregulation permanent and incredibly difficult for anyone else to ever reverse. A new executive order created what critics are calling a regulatory chokehold. It forces government agencies to repeal 10 existing regulations for every single new one they want to issue. And on top of that, the total cost of all new rules for the year has to be less than zero. This makes it just about impossible to introduce any new protections for public health or the environment. So, when you look at this whole collection of actions, rescinding the science, pulling out of global treaties, and completely rewriting the budget rules, it all points to a singular, overarching goal: to create a permanent vacuum in federal climate oversight. A goal the EPA administrator described in pretty stark terms as a dagger into the heart of the climate change religion. Ultimately, the legality of this whole thing, what one legal expert called a regulatory Everest, will almost certainly be decided by the Supreme Court. But the actions that have already been taken have fundamentally reshaped America's policy landscape, and it leaves us all with a critical question for the future. If the government's primary legal tool for fighting climate change is broken, what comes next? This has been another Way Too Real disaster from luchaclick.com.